The van rattled along the narrow, fog-choked road, its headlights slicing through the murk like dull, trembling blades, casting frail beams that flickered and died against the oppressive darkness. The forest on either side was a fortress of twisted pines, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky, their roots buried in a carpet of damp moss and decay, pulsing with an unseen rhythm. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet earth and a sharp, metallic tang, like blood left to rust, that clung to the inside of the van like a second skin, seeping into the fabric of the seats, the clothes of its occupants, their very breath. Inside, 4 friends, Elias, Clara, Viktor, and Sofia, sat in a brittle, suffocating silence, the remnants of an earlier argument hanging between them like a noose, tightening with every mile, every moment lost in the endless night. Elias, 32, gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, his sharp jaw clenched, his blue eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror, where he caught glimpses of his friends' strained faces, their expressions etched with exhaustion and fear. His sandy hair was damp with sweat, sticking to his forehead despite the biting cold that seeped through the van's cracked windows. The map on the passenger seat was a relic, its faded lines and smudged ink useless against the endless forest, its promise of a village, Kaelhof, nothing more than a cruel jest in the face of the relentless dark. They were lost, deep in a forgotten corner of Europe, far from any sign of civilization, the road stretching on like a wound through the forest, its edges raw and bleeding fog. "We should have stopped at that 2 hours ago," Clara said from the back, her voice sharp as broken glass, cutting through the silence with a venom born of fear. Her dark curls were pulled into a messy bun, strands escaping to frame her pale, angular face, her brown eyes flashing with irritation and something deeper, something that trembled beneath her bravado. She hugged her woolen jacket tighter, her fingers twitching, her nails bitten to the quick. At 29, Clara was quick to anger, her sharp tongue a shield against the world, but tonight that shield was cracking, her eyes darting to the windows, where the fog pressed like a living thing. "This road's a dead end, Elias. You know it." "Clara, please," Sofia murmured, her voice soft but strained, barely audible over the engine's drone, her breath visible in the chill. She sat beside Clara, her pale hands folded in her lap, her green eyes scanning the darkness outside, wide and unblinking, reflecting the faint glow of the dashboard. At 26, Sofia was the group's peacemaker, her gentle demeanor a counterpoint to Clara's fire, but tonight her calm was crumbling, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her sweater, her blonde hair falling in damp strands across her face. "We'll find a turnoff soon. Right, Elias?" Elias didn't answer, his throat tight, his pulse thudding in his ears like a drum, his hands slick with sweat on the wheel. His gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, catching Viktor's scowl, the man's broad shoulders hunched, his arms crossed over his leather jacket, his dark hair falling into his eyes. At 30, Viktor was perpetually skeptical, his sarcasm a defense against the world, but tonight it was laced with an edge of unease, his voice low and tight. "This is what we get for trusting Elias's shortcut. What's the plan now, Captain? Drive until we're out of gas." "Enough," Elias snapped, his voice cutting through the tension like a whip, though it trembled slightly, betraying his own fear, his own doubt. "We're fine. There's a village up ahead, according to the map. We'll stop there, get directions, and..." "Map?" Viktor interrupted, leaning forward, his breath fogging in the cold air, his eyes narrowing, his hands clenched into fists. "That thing's older than my grandmother's knitting. For all we know, we're driving in circles, Elias." Clara groaned, rubbing her temples, her fingers leaving faint smudges of dirt on her skin, her voice sharp with frustration. "Great. So we're lost, it's freezing, and we're in the middle of nowhere. Perfect road trip. Sofia reached out, touching Clara's arm, her fingers trembling, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting to the windows, where the fog seemed to pulse, alive and hungry. Let's not fight. It's late, and we're all tired. We'll find somewhere to rest soon. The van lapsed back into silence, the only sounds the drone of the engine, the creak of the worn suspension, and the faint whistle of wine through the windows, carrying that metallic tang that seemed to grow stronger with every mile, every breath, coating their tongues, their lungs, their thoughts. The fog thickened, curling like ghostly fingers across the road, swallowing the headlights' feeble glow, reducing the world to a tunnel of gray and black. Elias squinted, his heart thudding in his chest, his hands slick with sweat, his mind racing. They'd been driving for hours, the road stretching on without end, the map's promise of Kalehof a fading hope, drowned by the oppressive darkness and that ever-present scent, blood and rust, decay and despair. The argument that had fractured their group earlier was more than just the frustration of being lost. It had roots in their shared history, a tapestry of memories woven through years of friendship, now fraying under the weight of time and unspoken resentments. They'd met at university, bonded by late-night study sessions, drunken debates, and reckless adventures, road trips to crumbling castles, midnight swims in icy lakes, promises to never grow apart. Elias, the planner, had always been the anchor, his quiet confidence holding them together, but his insistence on this detour, his shortcut through the hinterlands to avoid the crowded highways, had sparked Clara's anger, Viktor's skepticism, and Sofia's quiet worry. This trip was meant to be a last hurrah, a chance to recapture the reckless freedom of their youth before life pulled them apart, Elias to his demanding new job in the city, Clara to her graduate studies in literature, Viktor to his restless wandering, Sofia to her quiet life with her fiancé, a man none of them had met. But now, lost in the fog, that dream felt like a distant memory, replaced by a growing dread that none of them could name, a fear that curled in their guts like a living thing. Elias's mind drifted to the night before, the last time they'd felt like themselves. They'd camped by a lake, the fire crackling, their laughter echoing under the stars. Clara had teased Viktor about his latest failed romance, her voice sharp but playful, her eyes glinting with mischief. Sofia had leaned against Elias, her head on his shoulder, her voice soft as she spoke of her fiancé, her dreams of a simple life. Viktor had cracked open another beer, his sarcasm softer in the firelight, his stories of his travels, half true, half exaggerated, drawing laughter from them all. Elias had felt the weight of their friendship then, the bond that had held them together through heartbreak, failure, and triumph. But now, in the cold, fog-choked van, that warmth was gone, replaced by a chill that seeped into their bones, their minds, their souls. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Elias saw it, a figure standing by the roadside, thumb outstretched, a silhouette in the mist, barely visible against the twisted pines, a shadow that seemed to flicker, to waver, like a flame about to die. "Who the hell is that?" Viktor said, sitting up, his voice low and tight, his hand instinctively gripping the edge of the seat, his knuckles white. Elias slowed the van, his pulse quickening, his breath catching in his throat, his hands trembling on the wheel. The figure was a woman, young, maybe in her early 20s, with pale skin and dark hair that hung in wet, tangled strands over her face, obscuring her features, clinging to her cheeks like seaweed. She wore a thin, gray dress, far too light for the biting cold, its hem tattered and stained with mud, black and glistening, as if she'd crawled from a grave. Her bare feet were caked with the same black mud, and she stood motionless, her thumb raised, her face half hidden in shadow, her presence an anomaly in the desolate night, a wound in the fabric of reality. "She's hitchhiking," Sofia said, her voice tinged with unease, her breath foggy in the chill, her hands tightening in her lap, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweater until it stretched. "Out here? At this hour?" "Looks like she needs help," Elias said, his hands tightening on the wheel, his voice betraying a tremor he couldn't suppress, his heart pounding in his chest. "We can't just leave her." "Are you serious?" Clara hissed, leaning forward, her eyes wide with disbelief, her voice sharp and panicked, her hands gripping the seat in front of her. "She could be anyone, Elias. This is how horror movies start, picking up some creepy stranger in the middle of nowhere." "She's alone, Clara," Sofia said, her eyes fixed on the woman, her voice softening but laced with doubt, her fingers trembling as she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "And it's freezing. What if she's hurt?" Viktor snorted, his breath fogging the window beside him, his eyes never leaving the figure, his hand hovering near the door handle, as if ready to bolt. "Or what if she's a psycho with a knife?" "I vote we keep driving." Elias ignored them, pulling the van to a stop beside the woman, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence. The engine idled, its low rumble the only sound in the fog-choked night, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. The woman didn't move, her thumb still raised, her face obscured by her hair, her stillness unnerving, almost inhuman, as if she were a statue carved from the fog itself. Elias rolled down the window, a gust of icy air flooding the van, carrying with it that sharp, metallic scent, now stronger, like blood and rust mingled with something fouler, like decay left to fester, a smell that made his stomach churn, his eyes water. "Hey," he called, his voice louder than he intended, echoing in the stillness, his breath visible in the cold, his heart pounding in his chest. "You okay? Need a ride?" The woman's head tilted slightly, as if considering his words, her movements slow and deliberate, almost mechanical, like a puppet on invisible strings, her body swaying slightly, as if moved by a wind that didn't exist. Then, she lowered her arm and stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the asphalt, leaving faint, wet prints that glistened in the headlights, each step accompanied by a faint squelch, like mud sucking at her soles, a sound that sent a shiver down Elias's spine, his skin crawling. Her eyes, when they met his through the window, were dark and unblinking, like twin voids that swallowed the light, reflecting nothing, not even the glow of the headlights, their depths endless, pulling at his mind like a tide. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but clear, with a faint, unplaceable accent that seemed to echo from somewhere deep and forgotten, like a voice from a nightmare, a sound that curled around his thoughts, heavy and cold. "I need to get to the village. It's not far." Clara leaned forward, whispering fiercely in Elias's ear, her breath hot against his neck, her voice trembling with fear, her hands shaking. "Elias, I swear, if you let her in." "Clara, stop," Sofia said, her voice firm despite her trembling hands, her eyes locked on the woman, her face pale, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "She's freezing. Look at her, she's not even wearing shoes." Elias hesitated, his instincts warring with his conscience, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst, his hands slick with sweat on the wheel. Something about the woman felt wrong, her stillness, her eyes, the way the air seemed to grow colder, heavier, in her presence, the metallic scent now so strong it made his stomach churn, his head throb. But Sofia was right, she looked half-frozen, her lips tinged blue, her dress clinging to her thin frame like a shroud, damp and tattered at the edges, stained with streaks of mud that looked almost black in the dim light, shifting like veins beneath the fabric. "Get in," he said finally, his voice low, nodding toward the back door, his hands trembling, his heart racing. The woman moved to the side door, her bare feet leaving faint, wet prints on the asphalt, each step accompanied by that squelching sound, like flesh sinking into mud, a sound that made Elias's skin crawl, his stomach twist. Viktor muttered a curse under his breath but slid over to make room, his eyes never leaving her, his hand hovering near the door handle, his body tense, ready to bolt. The door creaked open, its hinges protesting, a sound like a scream in the silence, and the woman climbed in, settling beside Sofia, her movements slow and deliberate, her presence filling the van with a chill that seeped into their bones, their minds, their souls. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping sharply, and a faint, earthy scent, like wet leaves and decay, filled the space, mingling with the metallic tang that now clung to their clothes, their skin, their breath, a smell that made their eyes water, their throats burn. "I'm Elias," he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror, trying to keep his voice steady, though his hands shook, his eyes catching hers in the reflection, those dark, unblinking voids that seemed to pull at his soul. "This is Clara, Viktor, and Sofia. What's your name?" The woman brushed her hair back, revealing a pale, delicate face, her skin almost translucent in the dim light, her cheekbones sharp, her lips thin and bloodless, her eyes striking, too large for her features, shimmering with an unnatural sheen, like oil on water, reflecting the dim light in a way that made Elias's skin crawl, his heart pound. "Lina," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried a weight that made the air feel thick, oppressive, like a storm about to break, a sound that echoed in their minds, pulling at their thoughts. "Where are you headed, Lina?" Sofia asked, her tone gentle but cautious, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweater until it stretched, her eyes darting to Lina and then away, unable to hold her gaze. "The village," Lina said, her gaze drifting to the window, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside, as if seeing something the others couldn't, something hidden in the fog, her voice soft but heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. "It's close. You'll see the lights soon." Clara frowned, her arms crossed tightly, her voice low and sharp, her eyes flicking to Lina with suspicion, her hands trembling slightly. "What were you doing out here, anyway? It's the middle of nowhere. No one just stands on a road like this at night." Lina's lips curved into a faint smile, but she didn't answer, her eyes still locked on the window, her hands folded in her lap, her fingers long and pale, almost skeletal, her nails cracked and black, dripping with something dark and viscous, like oil or blood. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, and Elias felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine, like cold fingers brushing his neck, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands slick with sweat. He shifted the van into gear and pressed the accelerator, the tires humming against the asphalt, the engine's rumble a small comfort against the growing dread that gnawed at his gut, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. "Okay, Lina," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady, though his hands trembled, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, catching Lina's unblinking gaze, those dark, endless voids that seemed to pull at his soul. "We'll get you to the village. Just let us know where to drop you off." The van rolled forward, the fog swallowing the road ahead like a living thing, its tendrils curling around the headlights, dimming their glow to a faint, sickly yellow, the world reduced to a tunnel of gray and black. The tension in the van was palpable, each occupant stealing glances at Lina, who sat unnaturally still, her hands folded in her lap, her dress clinging to her like a second skin, damp and stained with streaks of mud that seemed to shift in the dim light, like veins pulsing beneath the fabric, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound. Sofia tried to break the silence, her voice overly bright, her words tumbling out in a rush, her hands trembling as she spoke, her eyes darting to Lina and then away, unable to hold her gaze. "So, Lina, do you live in the village?" she asked, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering there as if to anchor herself, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound calm. Lina turned her head slowly, her movements deliberate, her gaze locking onto Sofia's, her eyes unblinking, her smile faint and unsettling, like a mask that didn't quite fit, her voice soft but carrying an odd weight, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the air. "I did," she said, her words curling around their minds, heavy and cold, a sound that made their skin crawl, their heads throb. "A long time ago." Viktor snorted, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes narrowing, his voice laced with skepticism and a growing unease, his hands clenched into fists. "What's that supposed to mean? You move away or something?" Lina's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes, which seemed to shimmer with that same oily sheen, reflecting the dim light in a way that made the van feel smaller, the air thicker, the walls closing in. "Something like that," she said, her voice curling around the words like smoke, her fingers twitching slightly, as if responding to some unseen rhythm, a sound that echoed in their minds, pulling at their thoughts. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her voice barely above a whisper as she leaned towards Sofia, her eyes flicking to Lina with growing suspicion, her hands trembling, her breath hot against Sofia's ear. "This is weird," she said, her voice trembling with fear, her eyes wide. "I don't like her." "Shoo," Sofia hissed, glancing at Lina, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment, her hands tightening in her lap, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweater until it tore. "She can hear you." The road curved sharply, and the fog began to thin, revealing a faint glow in the distance, a sickly yellow light that flickered like a dying flame, swaying in a wind that didn't exist, its glow casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. "That must be the village," Elias said, relief creeping into his voice, though it was tempered by the unease that gnawed at his gut, a feeling that had grown stronger with every mile, every glance at Lina's unblinking eyes, every whiff of that metallic scent that clung to the air, sharp and bitter, like blood and rust. "See? We're almost there." But as they drew closer, the glow didn't resolve into the warm lights of a village, a cluster of homes with glowing windows and signs of life. It was a single, flickering lantern, swaying on a rusted pole by the roadside, its light casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt, shadows that seemed to move on their own, twisting and writhing like living things, their forms almost human, almost alive, their limbs too long, their faces too hollow. The road narrowed, the trees pressing closer, their branches scraping the van's sides with a sound like nails on a chalkboard, each screech sending a jolt through Elias's nerves, his hands tightening on the wheel, his heart pounding in his chest. His relief faded, replaced by a gnawing dread that settled in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. "Lina," he said, glancing at her in the mirror, his voice tighter now, his eyes catching hers in the reflection, those dark, unblinking voids that seemed to pull at his soul, his heart, his mind. "Is this the right way?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible over the engine's hum, yet it cut through the noise like a blade, sharp and cold, sending a shiver down his spine, his skin crawling. "Keep going." The lantern's light grew brighter, revealing a small stone bridge spanning a dark, sluggish river, its water black and still, reflecting the lantern's sickly glow like a mirror, a surface that seemed alive, watching, waiting. Beyond the bridge, the road ended abruptly at a cluster of crumbling buildings, houses with sagging roofs, their windows dark and shattered, their walls overgrown with vines that seemed to pulse in the dim light, like veins beneath skin, a sight that made Elias's stomach churn, his heart pound. The village, if it could be called that, was a ruin, abandoned to time and neglect, its streets choked with weeds, its air thick with the scent of rot, the metallic tang now so strong it coated their tongues, their throats, their lungs, a smell that made their eyes water, their heads throb. "This isn't right," Clara said, her voice rising, her hands gripping the seat in front of her, her knuckles white, her eyes wide with panic, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "There's no one here. This place is dead." Lina didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the bridge, her smile faint and unsettling, her presence a weight that pressed against their minds, their hearts, their souls. She leaned forward, her breath cold against Elias's neck, sending a shiver down his spine that made his skin crawl, his heart pound. She pointed to the bridge, her finger pale and skeletal, her nail cracked and black, dripping with something dark and viscous, like oil or blood, a sight that made his stomach twist, his head throb. "Stop there," she said, her voice sharp now, like the crack of breaking ice, echoing in the van like a command, a sound that made their ears ache, their heads throb, their vision blur. Elias's hands tightened on the wheel, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his mind racing with fear, with doubt, with the primal urge to flee. "Lina, this place is deserted. Where exactly are you going?" "Stop," she repeated, her voice echoing with an unnatural resonance, as if it came from the depths of the earth itself, a sound that made his ears bleed, his head throb, his vision blur, a weight that crushed his mind, his heart, his soul. He slammed on the brakes, the van skidding to a halt just before the bridge, its tires screeching against the asphalt, the sound swallowed by the fog, a scream in the silence. The lantern swayed on its rusted pole, its light casting eerie shadows across the ruins, the shapes twisting and writhing like living things, their forms almost human, almost alive, their limbs too long, their faces too hollow, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light as Lina's. The air grew colder, the earthy scent stronger, now laced with something fouler, like the stench of a grave left open, the metallic tang so thick it coated their tongues, their throats, their lungs, a smell that made their eyes water, their heads throb, their hearts stutter. Elias realized with a jolt that Lina was no longer in the back seat, her seat empty, the air where she'd been colder, heavier, as if she'd left something behind, a presence that lingered, watching, waiting. "Where'd she go?" Viktor demanded, twisting around, his eyes wide with panic, his breath coming in short gasps, his hands fumbling with the door handle, his body trembling with fear. Sofia's hands flew to her mouth, her voice trembling, her eyes darting around the van, her face pale as death, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "She was just here. I felt her next to me, her dress brushed my arm, it was cold, so cold." Clara's voice shook as she grabbed Elias's shoulder, her nails digging into his skin, drawing blood, her eyes wide with panic, her breath hot and ragged. "Elias, get us out of here. Now." He shifted into reverse, his hands shaking, his heart hammering, his mind racing with fear, with doubt, with the primal urge to flee. But the engine sputtered and died, the dashboard lights flickering before going dark, the headlights flickering, then extinguishing, plunging them into darkness, a blackness so complete it felt like a weight, crushing their minds, their hearts, their souls. The only light came from the lantern, its sickly glow illuminating the bridge, and the figure standing at its center, a silhouette in the fog, a shadow that seemed to pulse, to breathe. It was Lina, her gray dress billowing in a wind that didn't exist, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light, like twin embers in the night, burning through the fog, their glow piercing their minds, their hearts, their souls. She raised a hand, beckoning them, her fingers long and twisted, dripping with black water that hissed as it hit the ground, leaving dark, smoking stains on the stone, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their heads throb. "Get out," she said, her voice echoing inside their skulls, sharp and commanding, a sound that made their ears bleed, their hearts stutter, their minds reel, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. Viktor swore, fumbling with the door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the handle, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "I'm not staying here." He shoved it open and stumbled out, his boots slipping on the damp asphalt, his breath visible in the freezing air, his body trembling with fear. Clara and Sofia scrambled after him, their breaths fogging, their movements frantic, their eyes wide with panic. Elias hesitated, his heart hammering, the air in the van suffocating, the cold seeping into his bones, the stench of decay overwhelming, making his eyes water, his throat burn, his mind reel. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam weak but steady, and joined them outside, his legs unsteady on the ground, his boots sinking into the soft, wet earth, the mud sucking at his soles, a sound that echoed Lina's squelching steps. The bridge was old, its stones slick with moss and damp, its edges crumbling into the river below, the water black and still, reflecting the lantern's sickly glow like a mirror, a surface that seemed alive, watching, waiting, hungry. Lina stood at its far end, her figure shimmering like a mirage, her eyes fixed on them, glowing brighter now, like the eyes of a predator in the dark, unblinking and relentless, their glow piercing their minds, their hearts, their souls. "Come," she said, her voice both a whisper and a scream, reverberating in their minds, a sound that made their skin crawl, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. "You're so close. Stay back." Clara shouted, her voice cracking with fear, her hands clenched into fists, her body shaking, her eyes wide with panic, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "What do you want?" Lina's head tilted, her smile twisting into something grotesque, her lips parting to reveal teeth that were too sharp, too many, glinting in the lantern's light like knives, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their heads throb. "I want to go home," she said, her voice a chorus of whispers, layered and dissonant, like voices trapped in a void, screaming to be free, a sound that echoed in their minds, pulling at their thoughts, their fears, their souls. "And you're going to take me?" The ground trembled, a low rumble that shook the bridge and sent pebbles skittering into the river below, the water churning, its surface rippling as if something massive moved beneath it, something alive and hungry, its presence a weight that pressed against their minds, their hearts, their souls. Sofia screamed, clutching Elias's arm, her nails digging into his skin, drawing blood, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Elias said, his voice hoarse, his flashlight beam darting across the bridge, catching glimpses of cracks in the stone, widening with each tremor, the gaps dark and endless, a sight that made his heart pound, his head throb, his mind reel. "But we need to move." They turned to run, but the road behind them was gone, swallowed by the fog, a thick, gray wall that pulsed like a heartbeat, pressing against them, forcing them toward the bridge, a living thing that wrapped around their legs, their arms, their throats. The village had vanished, leaving only the bridge, the lantern, and Lina, her presence a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls, her laughter a constant, maddening hum that echoed in their skulls, a sound that made their skin crawl, their heads throb, their vision blur. She stepped closer, her bare feet leaving wet, black prints on the stone, each step accompanied by that squelching sound, like flesh sinking into mud, a sound that made their stomachs churn, their hearts pound, their minds reel. "You can't leave," she said, her voice a cacophony of voices, young and old, male and female, all screaming in unison, a sound that made their ears bleed, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. "Not until you help me." Viktor spun, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists, his voice shaking with rage and fear, his eyes wide with panic, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Help you? You're not even human." Lina's laugh was a jagged, hollow sound, like glass shattering in slow motion, echoing across the bridge, reverberating in their skulls, a sound that made their skin crawl, their heads throb, their vision blur. She said, her voice softening, almost wistful, but laced with menace, her eyes glowing brighter, burning through the fog, their glow piercing their minds, their hearts, their souls. "Once. But the river took me. It always takes what it wants." The rumbling grew louder, and the bridge began to crack, fissures snaking across the stone like veins, the gaps widening with each tremor, threatening to swallow them, a sight that made their hearts pound, their heads throb, their minds reel. The lantern flickered, casting wild shadows that seemed to move on their own, twisting into shapes that were almost human, almost alive, their limbs too long, their faces too hollow, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light as Lina's, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Elias's flashlight beam caught Lina's face, and he froze. Her eyes were gone, replaced by empty sockets dripping with black water, like tears of ink, pooling on the stone below her, spreading like a stain, a sight that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Sofia's hand and pulling her forward, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst, his boots slipping on the slick stone, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his mind racing with fear, with doubt, with the primal urge to flee. They stumbled across the bridge, the stones crumbling beneath their feet, the cracks widening with every step, threatening to pull them into the darkness below, a sight that made their hearts pound, their heads throb, their minds reel. Lina's laughter followed, echoing from every direction, a cacophony that burrowed into their minds, making their heads throb, their vision blur, their ears bleed. The river surged, waves crashing against the banks, and Elias glimpsed shapes in the water, pale, bloated figures with hollow eyes, their hands reaching up, their fingers clawing at the air, their mouths open in silent screams, their faces twisted in agony, a sight that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. "Don't look," he yelled, dragging Sofia forward, his arm burning with the effort, his boots slipping on the moss-covered stone, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his mind racing with fear, with doubt, with the primal urge to flee. Clara tripped, crying out as she hit the ground, her hands scraping against the jagged stone, blood welling from her palms, staining her jacket red, a sight that made their hearts pound, their heads throb, their minds reel. Viktor hauled her up, his face a mask of terror, his eyes wild, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps, his hands shaking as he pulled her to her feet. "She's doing this," he shouted, his voice breaking, his body trembling with fear, with rage, with despair. "She's not letting us go." They reached the far side of the bridge, but the fog was thicker now, a living thing that coiled around them, heavy and suffocating, pressing against their skin like damp cloth, cold and clammy, a presence that wrapped around their legs, their arms, their throats. Lina appeared ahead, her form shifting, now a young woman in a gray dress, her face pale and delicate, her eyes glowing, now a decayed corpse, her flesh gray and waterlogged, her dress rotting away to reveal bones that glistened with slime, her eyes burning with that unnatural light, her smile a nightmare of jagged teeth, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. "Help me," she whispered, her voice in their minds, sharp and insistent, a pressure that made their ears bleed, their heads throb, their vision blur, a sound that felt like it was tearing them apart from the inside. "Take me home." Sofia was sobbing, her hands over her ears, her body shaking uncontrollably, her blonde hair plastered to her face with sweat and river water, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What does she mean? Where's her home? Elias's mind raced, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps, his flashlight beam trembling in his hand, catching glimpses of Lina's shifting form, her face melting like wax, her eyes glowing brighter, burning through the fog, their glow piercing his mind, his heart, his soul. The river. She'd said the river took her. He looked at the churning water, the shapes writhing beneath, their hands reaching, their mouths open in silent agony, their faces twisted in torment, a sight that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. "The river," he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the water, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with fear, with doubt, with the primal urge to flee. "She wants to go back to the river." "Are you insane?" Clara screamed, her eyes wide with panic, her hands still bleeding, staining her jacket, her face streaked with tears and mud, her voice breaking, her body trembling with fear, with grief, with despair. "We're not going near that thing." But the fog tightened, forcing them toward the bank, its tendrils wrapping around their legs, their arms, their throats, pulling them closer to the water, like hands guiding them to their doom, a presence that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls. The ground was soft, sucking at their shoes, the mud cold and slimy, and the air reeked of rot, the metallic tang now overwhelming, like blood mixed with decay, choking their lungs, making their eyes water, their heads throb, their hearts stutter. Lina hovered above the water, her empty sockets fixed on them, her smile a nightmare of jagged teeth, her hands outstretched, dripping with black water that hissed as it hit the ground, leaving dark, smoking stains on the earth, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. "You promised," she said, her voice a chorus of screams, young and old, male and female, all clawing at their minds, a sound that made their blood run cold, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. "You said you'd take me. We didn't promise anything." Viktor shouted, his voice breaking, his face pale as death, his hands clenched into fists, his body trembling with fear, with rage, with despair. But his words were cut off as the ground gave way beneath him, the mud collapsing into a sinkhole, a black, gaping maw that swallowed the earth, a sight that made their hearts pound, their heads throb, their minds reel. He fell, sinking into the muck, and screamed as hands, cold, slimy hands, their fingers like eels, their nails black and cracked, grabbed his legs, pulling him toward the water, their touch burning like frostbite, their grip like iron. His fingers clawed at the ground, tearing up clumps of earth, his nails breaking, blood mixing with the mud, but the hands were relentless, pulling him down, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. "Viktor!" Elias lunged, grabbing his arm, his muscles straining as he pulled, his boots sinking into the mud, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. But the hands were too strong, their fingers wrapping around Viktor's thighs, his waist, pulling him down, their touch burning like frostbite, their grip like iron, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. His screams turned to gurgles as he was dragged under, the river swallowing him whole, bubbles breaking the surface, then nothing, the water still and silent, as if he'd never been there, a sight that made their hearts pound, their heads throb, their minds reel. Clara collapsed, sobbing, her hands covering her face, her body shaking, her bloodied hands leaving streaks on her cheeks, her voice raw with grief and terror, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "No, no, no," she screamed, her voice echoing across the river, swallowed by the fog, a sound that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Sofia clung to Elias, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with terror, her hands gripping his arms so tightly it hurt, her nails drawing blood, her blonde hair plastered to her face with sweat and river water, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "What do we do? Elias, what do we do?" Elias's flashlight flickered, its beam catching Lina's decaying form, her flesh peeling away in strips, revealing bone and sinew beneath, her eyes glowing brighter, burning through the fog, their glow piercing his mind, his heart, his soul. She was closer now, her hands outstretched, black water dripping from her fingers, pooling on the ground like oil, spreading toward them, hissing as it touched the earth, a sight that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. "Take me home," she said, her voice inside their skulls, a pressure that made their ears bleed, their heads throb, their vision blur, a sound that felt like it was tearing them apart from the inside, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. "What do you want us to do?" Elias asked, his voice shaking, his mind screaming to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there, helpless in the face of her presence, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Lina's smile widened, her eyeless face looming closer, her teeth glinting in the dim light, sharp and jagged, her flesh melting like wax, her bones glistening with slime, her eyes glowing brighter, burning through the fog, their glow piercing his mind, his heart, his soul. "Cross the river," she said, her voice a chorus of screams, a sound that made their blood run cold, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. "Carry me across." Sofia whimpered, her hands clutching Elias's jacket, her nails digging into his skin, drawing blood, her face pale as death, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Elias, we can't go in there." "We have to," he said, his voice hollow, his eyes fixed on the churning water, the shapes writhing beneath, their hands reaching, their faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams, a sight that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. "It's the only way." Clara grabbed his arm, her nails drawing blood, her face streaked with tears and mud, her eyes wild with panic, her voice breaking, her body trembling with fear, with grief, with despair. "You're going to get us killed," she screamed, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. "Maybe," he said, meeting her eyes, his own filled with a desperate resolve, his heart pounding, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his mind racing with fear, with doubt, with the primal urge to flee. "But if we don't try, we're dead anyway." The river roared, its surface alive with writhing shapes, their pale forms twisting just beneath the water, their hands reaching, their mouths open in silent screams, their faces twisted in torment, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Elias took Sofia's hand, then Clara's, their fingers slick with sweat and blood, and stepped into the water, the cold biting into his bones, the current pulling at his legs like a living thing, hungry and relentless, the mud sucking at his boots, threatening to pull him down, a sensation that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. Lina hovered beside them, her presence a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls, her laughter a constant, maddening hum that echoed in their skulls, a sound that made their skin crawl, their heads throb, their vision blur. "Keep going," she whispered, her voice slithering through their thoughts, a sound that made their blood run cold, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. The water rose to their waists, then their chests, the cold numbing their limbs, their breath fogging in the air, their bodies shaking uncontrollably, their hearts pounding, their minds reeling. Hands brushed against their legs, cold and grasping, their fingers like ice, burning where they touched, their nails scratching at their skin, drawing blood, a sensation that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Sofia screamed as something tugged at her ankle, pulling her down, her hands flailing, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Elias yanked her back, his arms burning with the effort, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, catching glimpses of pale, bloated faces beneath the water, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands reaching, pulling, dragging, a sight that made his stomach churn, his heart pound, his mind reel. "Don't stop," he said, his teeth chattering, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his boots sinking into the riverbed, the mud sucking at his feet, the current threatening to sweep him away, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. Clara was sobbing, her movement sluggish, her eyes wild with fear, her hands still bleeding, staining the water red, the blood swirling in the current like ink, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. "I can't do this," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the roar of the river, her body shaking uncontrollably, her face pale as death, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I can't." Her words cut off as a hand burst from the water, wrapping around her throat, its fingers long and skeletal, their nails black and cracked, dripping with black water, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. She screamed, thrashing, her hands clawing at the air, her eyes wide with terror, her voice raw with panic, but the hand pulled her under, her cries bubbling to silence as the river claimed her, the water closing over her head, leaving only ripples in its wake, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Elias lunged, his fingers grazing her jacket, his heart pounding, his breath catching in his throat, his mind reeling, but she was gone, the river swallowing her whole, her screams echoing in his mind, a sound that made his skin crawl, his heart pound, his mind reel. "Lina!" he shouted, turning to the specter, his voice raw with anger and fear, his flashlight beam trembling in his hand, catching glimpses of her decaying form, her flesh peeling away, her bones glistening with slime, her eyes glowing brighter, burning through the fog, their glow piercing his mind, his heart, his soul. "Stop this. We're doing what you want." Lina's eyeless face loomed closer, her smile wide and grotesque, her teeth glinting in the dim light, sharp and jagged, her flesh melting like wax, her bones glistening with slime, her eyes glowing brighter, burning through the fog, their glow piercing his mind, his heart, his soul. "Not yet," she said, her voice a chorus of screams, young and old, male and female, all clawing at his mind, making his vision blur, his head throb, his ears bleed, a sound that felt like it was tearing him apart from the inside, a weight that crushed his thoughts, his will, his hope. "Not until you're all mine." Sofia was shaking, her face pale as death, her hands gripping Elias's arms so tightly it hurt, her nails drawing blood, her blonde hair plastered to her face with sweat and river water, her eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Elias, please," she whispered, her voice breaking, her body trembling, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. "I don't want to die." "You won't," he said, though the words felt like a lie, his voice trembling, his body shaking with cold and fear, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. He dragged her forward, the water now at their necks, the current threatening to sweep them away, the hands more insistent, their touch burning like frostbite, their fingers wrapping around their legs, their arms, their throats, pulling, dragging, claiming, a sensation that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. His flashlight slipped from his hand, sinking into the depths, its beam flickering out, leaving them in darkness, the lantern's light gone, swallowed by the fog, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Lina's laughter filled the air, a cacophony of voices, young and old, male and female, all screaming, all laughing, a sound that made their blood run cold, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. Elias felt his strength fading, his body growing heavy, his mind clouding with the cold, the river pulling at him, its current relentless, its hands everywhere, pulling, dragging, claiming, a sensation that made his skin crawl, his heart pound, his mind reel. Sofia clung to him, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with terror, her hands slipping from his arm, her fingers slick with water and blood, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her body shaking uncontrollably, her face pale as death, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I'm scared." "Hold on," he said, his voice hoarse, his arms burning as he pulled her forward, his feet finding the muddy bank, the ground soft and treacherous, sucking at his boots, a sensation that made his skin crawl, his heart pound, his mind reel. They collapsed on the shore, gasping, their bodies soaked and shivering, the fog swirling around them, thick and oppressive, pressing against their skin like a living thing, cold and clammy, a presence that wrapped around their legs, their arms, their throats, a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls. Lina stood over them, her form more solid now, her dress pristine, her eyes whole but glowing with an unnatural light, like twin embers in the night, burning through the fog, their glow piercing their minds, their hearts, their souls. Her smile was triumphant, her voice soft and venomous, like a predator savoring its kill, her presence a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls. "You did it," she said, her words dripping with mockery, her eyes glowing brighter, burning into their souls, a sound that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. "You brought me home." Elias struggled to his feet, pulling Sofia up with him, his chest heaving, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his body trembling with cold and fear, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. "We did what you wanted," he said, his voice raw, his hands shaking, his eyes fixed on Lina's glowing eyes, her grotesque smile, her presence a weight that crushed his mind, his heart, his soul. "Now let us go." Lina's smile faded, her eyes darkening, the glow fading to a dull, lifeless gray, her face twisting into something inhuman, her features melting like wax, her bones glistening with slime, her presence a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls. "Go?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt, a sound that made their skin crawl, their heads throb, their vision blur, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. "But you're home, too." The ground trembled, a deep, bone-rattling rumble that shook the earth, and the fog parted, revealing not a forest but a vast, endless river, its surface teeming with pale, writhing shapes, their forms twisting in agony, their hands reaching, their mouths open in silent screams, their faces twisted in torment, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Elias's heart stopped as he realized the truth: they hadn't crossed the river. They were in it, part of it, trapped with Lina and the others she'd claimed. The shapes in the water were clearer now: Viktor, his face twisted in terror, his hands clawing at the surface; Clara, her eyes hollow, her mouth open in a silent scream; and countless others, their faces unfamiliar, their bodies bloated and pale, their hands reaching, pulling, dragging, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light as Lina's, a sight that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Sofia screamed, her voice swallowed by the water as it rose around them, cold and relentless, its surface closing over their heads, the current pulling them down, the hands wrapping around their legs, their arms, their throats, pulling them into the darkness, a sensation that made their skin crawl, their hearts pound, their minds reel. Elias tried to hold her, his hands grasping at her jacket, his fingers slick with water and blood, but his fingers passed through her, his body dissolving into the current, his vision blurring as the river claimed him, the cold seeping into his bones, his mind, his soul, a weight that crushed his thoughts, his will, his hope. Lina's face was the last thing he saw, her smile eternal, her eyes glowing in the dark, her voice a whisper that echoed in the void, a sound that followed them into the darkness, a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls. "Welcome home," she said, her voice a chorus of the damned, a sound that echoed through the river, through the fog, through the endless night, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. The van sat abandoned on the side of the road, its engine cold, its doors open, its interior damp with condensation, the seats stained with mud and water, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay, a smell that lingered like a curse. The fog had lifted, and the forest was silent once more, the trees standing like silent witnesses to the night's horrors, their branches swaying in a wind that carried the faint scent of blood and rot, a sound that echoed through the forest, a weight that crushed the silence. No trace of Elias, Clara, Viktor, or Sofia remained. The bridge stood empty, its stones cracked and moss-covered, the lantern extinguished, its rusted pole swaying in the breeze, creaking like a warning, a sound that echoed through the forest, a weight that crushed the silence. The river flowed quietly, its surface smooth, its depths hiding the secrets it had claimed, its waters black and still, reflecting nothing, a mirror that showed only darkness. In the years that followed, travelers would speak of a woman in a gray dress, standing by the roadside, her thumb outstretched, her face hidden in shadow, her eyes glowing in the dark, her smile faint and cold, her voice a whisper that curled around their minds, pulling them in. Those who stopped for her never reached their destination. Their cars would be found days later, abandoned, their interiors damp and reeking of decay, their seats stained with mud and water, their occupants gone, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and rust, the metallic tang lingering like a curse, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. On moonless nights, when the fog rolled in, the river whispered, its voice a chorus of the lost, calling for more to join its endless embrace, its waters hungry, its depths endless, a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls. And Lina waited, her smile eternal, her eyes glowing in the dark, her hunger never sated, her voice a siren's call that echoed through the forest, drawing the unwary to their doom, a weight that crushed their thoughts, their will, their hope. A lone truck rumbled down the road, its driver humming to a crackling radio, oblivious to the weight of the night, the fog thick and heavy, pressing against the windows like a living thing, a presence that wrapped around the cab, cold and clammy. The trees loomed like specters, their branches clawing at the sky, their roots buried in the earth, hiding secrets older than time, a weight that crushed the silence. He slowed as he saw her, a woman in a gray dress, her thumb outstretched, her hair wet and tangled, her face hidden in shadow, her eyes glowing in the dark, faint and cold, a sight that made his skin crawl, his heart pound, his mind reel. He rolled down the window, leaning out, his breath fogging in the cold air, his smile wide and trusting, unaware of the eyes watching from the darkness, the hands waiting in the shadows, the river waiting in the distance. "Hey, you need a ride?" he called, his voice cheerful, echoing in the stillness, unaware of the weight of the night, the hunger of the river, the curse that waited. She turned, her eyes glinting in the headlights, her smile faint and cold, her voice soft but heavy with promise, a sound that curled around his mind like smoke, pulling him in, a weight that crushed his thoughts, his will, his hope. "Yes," she said. "I need to get to the village. It's not far." The driver nodded, gesturing to the passenger seat, his smile wide and trusting, his eyes blind to the darkness that waited, the hands that reached, the river that hungered. "Hop in." The door creaked open, and the woman climbed in, the air growing colder, the scent of decay filling the cab, the metallic tang sharp and biting, coating his tongue, his lungs, his soul, a weight that crushed his thoughts, his will, his hope. The truck rolled forward, the fog swallowing the road, the river waiting in the distance, its surface still, its depths hungry, its hands reaching, its voices whispering, a weight that crushed the silence. The driver hummed, unaware of the eyes glowing beside him, unaware of the hands reaching from the darkness, unaware of the whisper that echoed in the night, a sound that followed him into the void, a weight that crushed his thoughts, his will, his hope. "Welcome home," it said, and the river waited, its hunger eternal, its embrace endless, its secrets buried in its depths, forever claiming those who dared to cross its path, a weight that crushed their minds, their hearts, their souls.